everybody. I'm happy that you're there. I can't really see you or even know that you're here, but I am here at least. My name is Gigi Deppe. I'm a journalist from Germany, and I'm your moderator for this webinar from the Council of Europe on journalism and the COVID-19 crisis. There's a lot I could say on behalf of my profession why this is an important webinar and why it was a good idea that you decided to tune in. But I would first like to open the floor for Michael Roth, Minister of State for Europe at the Federal Foreign Office in Germany, because Mr. Roth would like to welcome you.
Dear Maria, dear President, ladies and gentlemen, at the beginning of this conference, let me take the opportunity to highlight the importance of journalism and media in these challenging times during the COVID-19 pandemic. Our health depends not only on vaccines and medicines, but also on transparent and fact-based information about the virus. This pandemic continues to create uncertainty and fear all around the world. In this outstanding situation, it's crucial for our citizens to have objective and reliable information. And a key source of such information is a free and independent press. However, the pandemic has put media freedom in Europe and around the world under additional pressure. Some states are abusing the fight against COVID-19 as an excuse to imprison or silence opponents. Civil society and human rights defenders have come under increasing pressure. And the same is true, I'm afraid, for critical journalists. Too many of them are being persecuted just because they ask critical questions and research facts. Let me be very clear. Just for doing their job. Recently, the Turkish journalist and novelist Ahmet Altan was released after more than 4 years in prison. This is good news. But still, far too many are being harassed, silenced, and in too many cases put in prison. This is unacceptable. All member states of the Council of Europe have committed themselves to ensure the right of free expression in the European Convention of Human Rights. The European Court of Human Rights has confirmed this fundamental right at many occasions. Journalists are also facing digital attacks, online abuse, and hate speech on social media. Moreover, they are threatened and attacked in real life. This happens also in my country. Germany has recently seen a rise in hostility towards journalists and press teams and has therefore been designated a less safe place for them in the ranking system of Reporters Without Borders compared to previous years. We have seen that manipulation and disinformation offline and online can be amplifiers of the pandemic. Ladies and gentlemen, what can we do? Free media need our full support, both from us as governments and international organizations. The Council of Europe's platform for the protection of journalism and safety of journalists offers a very useful tool. Today, in front of the threat posed to media freedom, we have to be clear and vocal in underlining the importance of maintaining media freedom throughout the crisis. Because media freedom is a crucial basis of our democracy. We have to learn lessons from this pandemic and its special challenges for all of us. On behalf of the German Presidency at the Council of Europe, I thank you and wish you a very, very fruitful discussion.
Well, thank you, Michael Roth, Minister of State for Europe at the Federal Foreign Office in Germany. There's now a second, also very important person I'd like to announce, the Secretary General of the Council of Europe, Maria Pecinovic-Buric, who would like to welcome us. We are very delighted that you, Ms. Buric, have found the time to be with us. And now there's to you. You have the floor.
Minister, dear Michael, President of the Parliamentary Assembly, dear Rick, Deputy Director General, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. We are at the moment in history when access to reliable information is at a premium. To know the facts about COVID-19 is to know how to best protect yourself, your loved ones, and your broader community. And a free media is essential to ensure that this information is trusted, reliable, and widespread. There is no substitute for quality, fact-checked journalism. So it is both an irony and a tragedy that freedom of information and expression are facing extreme pressure in Europe today, with traditional media in many Council of Europe member states in decline over recent years. A decline that has identified thanks to a very pandemic that has underlined its necessity. The good news is that this slide is not inevitable. It can be stopped. But to do that, we need to be clear about the root causes and the remedies required. So what are these problems? Without question, they include the rise of violence and attacks directed towards journalists. Over recent years, our platform for the protection of journalism and the safety of journalists has recorded an upward trend in these chilling tactics, which have included murders and a high level of impunity. During the pandemic, such incidents have risen in number. In some countries, the volume of politicians and officials' anti-media rhetoric has gone up. Accusations about the spread of fake news have been levied against journalists, and public hostility has been stoked. Consequently, media workers have been subject to assaults and to arrests and police hindrance while reporting on protests and demonstrations. And on occasion, they have also become the target, demonstrators angered by media coverage of COVID-19. Over the past year, some national authorities have sought greater control over what the media can report. Yes, many governments have taken proactive steps to inform the public about coronavirus, running websites, hotlines, and regular press conferences with government figures and health experts. But others have taken measures to restrict journalists' access to these events, their ability to ask questions, and their freedom to travel. Delays in processing requests to access for information also become apparent. And this reduced access to information and places gives cause for concern. So too does COVID-related disinformation and the measures that have been introduced with the stated aim of countering it. It is true that fake or distorted news can spread panic and erode trust in institutions. And equally true that social media platforms, where falsehoods thrive, are often still not doing enough to stem the flow of misinformation. But responses that criminalize the spread disinformation and direct the removal of material from public view have presented problems of their own. Non-judicial takedown requests, the blocking of websites, broadcasting bans, the closure of media outlets, the arrest of journalists for their work on the pandemic frontline. We have seen all of these. And given the different interpretations that can be applied to fake news, there is a real risk that regulations criminalizing it can be abused. Only assertions that are blatantly false and which pose a clear risk to public health should be banned. More broadly, we have seen a deepening of the financial crisis and the crisis of trust that has afflicted the media throughout the last decade. Falling sales and advertising revenue for traditional media were made worse by lockdowns and their economic impact. This lack of a sustainable business model has hit local and regional media particularly hard, with smaller outlets often bought out or closing altogether. And yes, research shows that during the pandemic, television, radio, and press were more trusted sources of news than other outlets, including social media. But even so, only 38% of people say that they trust news media most of the time. As budgets are strained, quality falls, and disinformation grows, there is a worrying general tendency towards news skepticism when people have most to have faith in what they hear. So what's to be done? I have no doubt that this conference will act as a catalyst for new ideas and that it is to be welcomed. But this is not a standing start. The Council of Europe has already developed many tools that can be used by member states to address these issues. Freedom of expression, information, and assembly are guaranteed by the European Court of Human Rights, and its case law is there to be implemented and executed fully, swiftly, and without exception. We have a recommendation and implementation guide for member states on the protection of journalism and safety of journalists, and a further recommendation on the roles and responsibilities of Internet intermediaries. Our Tromsø Convention on access to official documents came into force just 5 months ago, recognizing a general right of access to official documents held by public authorities, and on which further ratifications will be important. And of Committee of Ministers declaration on the financial sustainability of quality journalism in the digital age is there to help national authorities too. It makes clear the importance of introducing beneficial tax regimes and media development support to counter the financial strain in the sector. Recognizing journalism as a public good, carrying out media and information literacy initiatives to strengthen the public's critical thinking, and the introduction of fact-checking services are all important too. These will reinforce quality journalism and people's trust in it. We have also issued a tailor-made response to the specific situation caused by COVID-19. Last April, I issued a toolkit document to our 47 member states. Its aim was to support them in taking measures that counter the public health crisis and uphold our standards on human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. It included a chapter dedicated specifically to freedom of expression and information, media freedom, and access to official information. And it was followed by an information document some months after, elaborating on these issues in the context of the ongoing crisis. The current situation is also outlined in a dedicated chapter of my 2021 annual report, A Democratic Renewal for Europe. It has been sent to our member states' governments today. And many of these issues will be addressed further at our Conference of Ministers responsible for media and information society when it meets in June. But I hope that this webinar will provide further food for thought about what member states should do and what further steps might be taken at the international level, because there remains a strong public appetite for reliable media, providing accurate information during the current pandemic and in general terms too. But in the current environment, that won't just happen. Rather, we must all play our role in creating the conditions for trust. And I'm grateful to the German presidency of our Committee of Ministers for providing this opportunity to explore what more we can do. I wish you every success in your deliberations.
Thank you, Ms. Bird. Thank you, Secretary General of the Council of Europe. And I would like to make some personal remarks myself. Of course, COVID-19 has had an impact on almost every part of our lives. Everybody can feel the tension. Everybody discusses COVID problems in our everyday lives. So it's very important, as you said, that media provide reliable news and help the public understand the pandemic. When I was asked to moderate this webinar, I was immediately interested because I've heard a lot of stories from colleagues who just try to do their jobs on reporting on public assemblies or demonstrations. For example, a colleague from my television station was attacked just a few weeks ago when reporting in Stuttgart about a demonstration from people that doubted COVID and doubted the necessity of any measurements or any actions. He is a very experienced reporter from abroad. He has reported from all different crisis places, and he was trained to move around in a hostile surrounding. At this moment in Stuttgart, he had several bodyguards with him, even though he was attacked with a huge stone while live reporting. And he decided to stop immediately. Even though he was very well prepared, he decided he couldn't do any reporting anymore. So I've heard similar stories from different European countries. So I state that we do have a problem here. Now, before we continue, I want to say something as a moderator. You know that online conferences can be very boring, but there's a tool to make them less boring or even interesting, and the secret is to change media a lot. So now we are going to watch a video prepared by Deutsche Welle, a short documentary that helps us get deeper into the subject. We all know responsible media play a crucial role in the pandemic. It's a few minutes long, so here we're now showing this video from Deutsche Welle.
Fact or fiction? True or false? That is what journalists have to establish. But how can viewers, listeners, and readers decide what and whom to believe? The public tend to give credence to reports if they trust the source. If they lose faith in a broadcaster or journalist, they will look for alternatives. That is where those who oppose open democratic societies see their opportunities to mislead and further undermine trust. Fake news campaigns are not a new phenomenon. But social media channels let them disseminate their propaganda faster and more effectively than ever before. How can the public be helped to distinguish honest, serious reporting from misinformation? Artificial intelligence and enhanced data can provide helpful tools, and social media companies are urged to do more to combat fake messages and misinformation. But the best tool available in the everyday struggle of media outlets for viewers and viewers' trust is to maintain or even enhance quality. The current COVID-19 pandemic has brought home to us all the crucial role of honest reporting by a free press.
Thank you for the filmmakers, the nameless filmmakers. The best tool is trust. I think this is going to be the theme of our webinar. But before we get into depth, I would like to announce another speaker. We have the special honor to welcome Mr. Xing Chu, the Deputy Director General of the UNESCO. And I'm sure that the UNESCO has a lot to say about the worldwide effects of the COVID crisis in many different areas of life. We are very happy, Mr. Chu, that you found the time to share your thoughts about the freedom of media with us.
Thank you very much. Your Excellency, Mr. Michael Roth, Minister of State for Europe at the Federal Foreign Office of Germany. Your Excellency, Ms. Maria Vesnovich-Burich, Secretary General of the Council of Europe. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to deliver these welcome remarks on behalf of the Director General of UNESCO, Ms. Audrey Azoulay. I would like to start by thanking Germany and the Council of Europe for organizing this webinar, focusing on the impact of COVID-19 on media freedom. It is both timely and crucial. Over the past year, journalists have helped us navigate overwhelming flows of information. They have opened our eyes to the truth when others would prefer to conceal it. When much of the world was quarantined at home, journalists worked tirelessly, often at great personal risk, to provide accurate information, check facts, and deconstruct disinformation. But those we have relied on the most to make sense of the COVID-19 pandemic are now struggling in more ways than one. First and foremost, journalists and media professionals are struggling because of the threats to their safety. At least 1,000 journalists across 75 countries have died of the virus since March 2020. Concurrently, journalists have been harassed, persecuted, and sometimes even physically attacked for doing their job and reporting on the pandemic. And as online activity has increased during lockdowns, so too has online violence, particularly against women journalists. Journalists are suffering from the psychological toll of covering the pandemic, long work hours, fears for job security, and the trauma of first-hand reporting on a deadly illness. Women journalists have experienced intensified pressure to quit working and care for their families. I would like to pay tribute here to all of the journalists who have worked so tirelessly to provide information on the pandemic. We owe them so much. To support them in their work, UNESCO and the Knight Center for Journalism, together with the World Health Organization, offered 2 massive open online courses on reporting professionally and safely on the pandemic and vaccination campaigns. Taken by more than 10,000 people from over 160 countries, their content has been tailored to support reliable and independent coverage of the COVID-19. However, we need to do more. We need collective action built around consensus as set out in the UN Plan of Action on the Safety of Journalists and the issue of impunity. This plan extends far beyond the United Nations, bringing together a range of stakeholders, including the Council of Europe. The Council of Europe has put this plan into action, for instance, with its platform to promote the protection of the safety of journalists, a unique mechanism that recently contributed to the development of the first digital online platform for journalist safety in Africa, supported by UNESCO in collaboration with the African Union. Ladies and gentlemen, the second way journalists, media professionals, and media houses are struggling is economically. Media business models have changed beyond recognition following the digital transformation. Now they are being hit hard by the health crisis. Nearly 90% of all media have lost revenue because of the pandemic. And as history has shown us, financial independence is synonymous with editorial independence. We need to support press freedom, including by strengthening the economic viability and therefore the diversity of media organizations. That is why earlier this week, the participants at the 2021 UNESCO World Press Freedom Day Conference adopted the Windehag Plus 30 Declaration, renewing the spirit of the Windehag Declaration on free, independent, and pluralistic press, which triggered the proclamation of the World Press Freedom Day in 1991. This declaration calls on governments to nurture the diversity of media organizations and to implement policies that safeguard independent and quality journalism. It calls on technological companies to defend information as a public good, for example, through fair partnership arrangements and the protection of journalists online. The third reason journalists are struggling is due to the restrictions placed on their activities, including by governments. To address the health crisis, more than 100 governments worldwide imposed the state of emergency provisions. In some countries, these measures legitimately implemented to contain the virus and tackle disinformation, resulted in disproportionate threats to freedom of expression and the curtailing of press freedom. State of emergency provisions must comply with international human rights standards. UNESCO is striving to ensure transparency and respect for public freedoms as defined by the international community. By working alongside policy makers, regulators, social media platforms, civil society, and the judiciary. Since 2013, we have trained over 18,000 judges, prosecutors, and security forces to prevent the persecution of journalists and to increase accountability for attacks against them. I am pleased to announce that next Monday, UNESCO and Oxford University are launching a new online course for judicial operators, in which these topics will be further developed. Almost 3,000 judges, prosecutors, and other judicial actors have already enrolled, and for those interested, it is still possible to join it. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, As the pandemic spread across the globe, so too did false information on COVID-19. In response, more people turned to traditional media sources in search of trustworthy information. To quote the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, "Free and independent journalism is our greatest ally to combating misinformation and disinformation." That is why UNESCO has adopted a multi-stakeholder approach to promoting and protecting media freedom, while also building media response capacities. But we could not do this without our partners, and we are thankful for the support and the trust of the Council of Europe. From media coverage of elections to the impact of digital technologies on freedom of expression, our organizations have long collaborated on these crucial issues. The Council of Europe also joined UNESCO on the 3rd May to celebrate World Press Freedom Day. Today, I thank the Council of Europe for standing alongside UNESCO and for their commitment to ensuring the protection and promotion of information as a true public good. Through our actions, we all play a role in helping to safeguard press freedom and access to information. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chu, for your welcome address. This was the Deputy Director General of the UNESCO. Now we'll start with the first panel, looking at the standards we share in Europe. But there's another video prepared by the Council of Europe. It's all about human rights standards that can effectively help counter the effects of a health crisis.
Freedom of expression and information and media freedom are crucial for the functioning of a democratic society, and they remain so in times of crisis, including in the unprecedented health crisis of today. Apart from taking a huge toll on different aspects of people's lives, the crisis has amplified many existing challenges for freedom of expression. Therefore, a coordinated, coherent approach is absolutely necessary. A number of instruments and mechanisms developed by the Council of Europe can help member states and also journalists, media stakeholders, more generally, and the civil society to effectively respond to the difficult situation that we face today, whereby honoring also the human rights obligations and protecting freedom of expression.
Now we'll go into it. We'll start the first panel. Let's look at the standards we share in Europe. We have a distinguished panel of experts that are going to speak to us. We have 4 experts speaking to us. And please I would like for you, those who are going to speak now, Mr. Pavli, Mr. Mir, Ms. Gilfadottir, and Mr. Giacomopoulos, please put on your camera so I can present you, that everybody knows who's going to be talking in the first panel. Maybe it is technically possible. Let's see. Oh, I can see all four speakers. Thank you for thank you for joining us and speaking to us. Our planning is, thank you for the cameras. I'll continue now. Our planning is that each speech should be about 10 minutes long. And dear public, while you're listening, you're invited to take part, to send us questions and remarks in the chat so that the four experts that we are going to listen to can answer, and that we maybe can discuss questions after their speeches. There shall be a coffee break at 3:40, and our second panel will focus on the situation of journalists during the pandemic. We'll discuss the effects of COVID-19 on the media. Same procedure here. We have four speeches from different experts, and you are again invited to take part and participate through the chat function. Now, what are the reasons for states, responses of states and the media sector? What are good practices and recommendations for mitigating the pandemic? Let me introduce our first expert. It's Darian Pavli, judge at the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg. Mr. Pavli, we're very honored that you spared some time for us. I've read that you, before becoming a judge, you had an extensive human rights law practice with a strong focus on freedom of expression and association. You advised the Parliament of Albania on major justice reforms, as well as defamation and freedom of information law reforms. Now, I wonder, as a judge and as a lawyer, tell us, what are the standards? Does everybody know what he or she has to do during a health crisis? What are the dangers today? Where do we have to be vigilant? And what are the cases your court has decided so far? I want to thank you already now for speaking to us. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me okay. I'd like to start by thanking the organizers of this event, which I find to be touching on some very important issues for our democracies. I would like to focus on more or less 3 or 4 points, drawing on the court's jurisprudence that might be of some relevance to the issues being discussed today. I have to make 2 clarifications in this respect, sort of by way of caveat. The first one is that the European Court of Human Rights does not set policy, does not tell governments what to do, what is the best that they can do. It decides whether interferences with freedom of expression and other rights in the catalogue in individual cases violate the convention or not, and the hope is that that jurisprudence can provide some guidance to the states, but it is at the end of the day a standard of minimum protection. The second point that I want to make is that this is the first time in the lifetime of the convention and the court that we've had a public health crisis of these proportions. And in that respect, there is, in a way, in a narrow sense, the precedents are limited. But I think that notwithstanding, there is a great wealth in the jurisprudence of the court, and there are general principles that can be of relevance, I think. The first point that I want to make is about what is known. They all revolve around this notion of information, disinformation, misinformation, or as it's known sometimes popularly, the fake news. A lot of the attention is often focused on the restrictions that governments place, but I'd like to start with the flip side of it, which is known in our case law as the positive obligations. because I think that this is the starting point, and it is an important one in facilitating a framework of a well-informed public in a public health emergency. What do I mean by that? In our jurisprudence, for example, under Article 2 of the Convention, which protects the right to life, or Article 8 of the Convention, which protects the right to physical and personal integrity of the person, including vis-à-vis risks of a health nature, the court has established there is a duty on the government to inform the public as reliably as they can on risks to life or public health in order to allow the public to make informed decisions and take the necessary precautions. This is part of the duty of safeguarding life and the physical and psychological integrity of individuals. And in this respect, I would note the cases of Öner Yildiz versus Turkey, which is under Article 2 of the Convention, or Guerra versus Italy under Article 8. Both of these cases, they dealt with risks stemming from industrial activities to public health, but I would argue that the general principles are also applicable in a pandemic situation. Secondly, I would like to touch upon, many of these issues have been touched upon already, but from the perspective of the jurisprudence, the question of derogations or the standards that apply in an emergency situation. Now, as you may know, a number of countries, a relatively small number of countries, member states to the European Convention, have entered formal derogations under Article 15 of the Convention during the pandemic, because in their assessment, they have, I suppose, judged necessary to do so to preserve their position under the Convention. The obvious point to make here is that a derogation to the Convention and derogations from Article 10, freedom of expression, are permissible. They're not in terms of Article 2, for example, the right to life. The obvious point here is that derogations are not a carte blanche. And the Convention itself, Article 15, says that they're allowed to the extent that they're strictly required by the exigencies of the situation. There have been, I think it would be important to note in this respect, two recent cases that have, in which the court has elaborated on these principles, specifically on the questions of relationship between derogations and freedom of expression. These were Mehmet Hasan Altan versus Turkey and Şahin Alpay versus Turkey, which involved restrictions adopted by that member state, Turkey in this case, for reasons of national security after the attempted coup in 2016. And the point that the court made in those two cases was that it highlighted the potential for abuse and threat to democratic values in a situation of a national emergency. And it said they must not serve as a pretext for limiting freedom of political debate, and that every effort should be made to safeguard the values of democratic society, such as pluralism and tolerance. I think beyond the legalities, there's two maybe that I, apart from the case law of the court, there's 2 points that I would like to make in my own personal capacity by way of policy, which I think are important considerations. In an emergency situation, the normal ability of government entities to monitor the situation, the regular oversight capacities of the government are under strain. And in these circumstances, it becomes even more important, not less important, even more important that the regular watchdogs of society, the media, the non-governmental sector, are able to have a say and speak freely. And I could refer here, for example, to the situation in many of our countries of the nursing homes. They had very serious problems during the pandemic. And so the ability of the media to shed light on what is happening on the so-called black spots that are not on the that are not on someone's attention, on the attention of government officials, can actually help save lives and improve the public health performance. And another aspect here is the role of whistleblowers, which is also protected by the jurisprudence of the court in the GUIA line of case law. And I would recall here that some of the early heroes of the pandemic were doctors in China and other places who in a way blew the whistle about what was really going on in the hospitals and the public health system. The third point relates to the whole issue of misinformation and disinformation. Now, this is, in some ways, it's an old story. In some ways, is new in terms of the laws that have been passed in recent years. And for that reason, the case law of the court is relatively limited, because many of the law of these anti-fake news laws in the popular parlance are relatively recent, and it takes some amount of time for cases of this nature to come before the court. And so because they have to exhaust domestic remedies without getting too technical about it. I would refer, however, to one case that might be of interest in this respect. It's a Swiss case from 1998. Its name is Hertel versus Switzerland, so that's Hertel, which involved an applicant who had made publications that indicated possible risks from microwaving food, which according to the applicant could lead to blood changes and other risk factors. And one of the companies producing microwaves went to court and obtained an injunction by the Swiss courts against the applicants that he should stop saying these things. And the justification put forward by the Swiss government was that this was meant to protect free and fair competition in society. In other words, the rights of the commercial operators. And the court here made some interesting point. It said that this amounted to a measure of prior restraint, which is one of the most severe restrictions that can be imposed under Article 10 of the Convention, and that they limited the applicant's ability to engage in a debate on a matter of public interest. It also noted that there was no scientific certainty on the point at issue on either side of the debate, and that the states cannot limit legitimate discussion only to generally accepted ideas, especially when there was no particular monopoly on the truth on a particular matter. And I think those are some important points. On one side, it is true that deliberate falsehoods, spreading things that one knows to be false, have no redeeming value under Article 10 of the Convention. They, in a sense, they bring nothing useful in a democratic society. But the problem is that when laws are drafted and applied in a way that is vague and that goes beyond the prohibition of deliberate falsehoods, that's one point. And the second important point, which one can surmise from the Hertel case, is what is the harm? What is the clear harm that the state must prove under the principled structure of Article 10? We call it a pressing social need. What is the pressing social need in a particular context to restrict speech or even to punish speech that may not be true, or that the person may not be able to prove that is true in a particular context? And the vaguer and the broader those prohibitions are, the more significant the chilling effect would be. There was a final point that I wanted to touch upon, but I don't think I have time for that now. If there are questions, I'm happy to take it later. But this is the responsibilities of major online platforms for information, misinformation, and disinformation, I think this is really more closer to the heart of the matter. That is where the largest part of misinformation happens in our day and age. And we, as democracy generally, we have just started to grapple with these issues and to figure out what are the best ways to regulate them. But you know, so it's a big debate, and it requires a whole separate discussion. In conclusion, I thought it might be interesting for the audience to very quickly note two cases that have been communicated by the court, because they're exactly on these topics. Communicated means that it's in the very early stages. They have been notified to the governments, but it will take some time to come to a decision. The first one is Avagyan versus Russia, which was communicated in November 2020, which involved an online comment posted on Instagram by the applicant, claiming that there were no real cases of COVID-19 in the Krasnodar region of Russia. He was convicted for disseminating untrue information on the internet and sentenced to a fine of 390 euros. And it's a case including claims under of free trial nature and freedom of expression. And the second one involves a claim under Article 11 of the Convention, which is the freedom of assembly and the freedom to protest, brought by the Communauté Genevoise d'Action Syndicale against Switzerland, and it relates to restrictions imposed by the Swiss authorities on freedom of assembly and demonstration in March 2020, and the resulting inability of this trade union to hold its usual public gatherings. So thank you very much again. I'll stop here now, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pavli. I'm very thankful as a moderator that you watched the time going forward. I've learned that the court can be a watchdog, that the court has warned already. Don't use this situation as a pretext to limit freedom of media. So I think we can come back to this later on in the discussion. Now I would like to introduce our next speaker. He comes from Germany, Christian Mier from Reporters Without Borders. Christian, you have been working as a journalist in Russia, Ecuador, and Germany, so you have a good impression how it feels to report from different parts in the world. What does your organization do in order to strengthen journalism? What has to be done right now? Please tell us more about that. Thank you for giving us an input.
Yeah, thank you, Gigi Deppe, and thanks for the German Presidency of the Council of Europe for hosting the seminar, for having me here. And I mean, in terms of my own impact, being impacted, our own work by COVID, I remember very well, Gigi Deppe, an encounter we had last year in Karlsruhe, where RSF was actually in the Constitutional Court in the first day after the lockdown measures in Germany have been lifted. And I remember this uncertainty of state institutions as well, how to actually handle, how to organize a court ruling. Actually in times of a pandemic, and it was, for me, honestly speaking, it was my first trip in the pandemic. And I remember very well, I'm starting with this because you see actually how the pandemic is really actually touching on institutions as well, and institutions in their uncertainty sometimes, how to deal it in democratic countries. And I remember this very well. And Reporters Without Borders, RSF, observed actually last year a wave of press freedom violations by many governments in response to this unprecedented health crisis, as they prevent access to reliable, freely reported and diverse information about the pandemic. These violations constitute an aggravating factor in the disease and eventually a threat to the lives of millions of human beings. And our already mentioned annual World Press Freedom Index, which we recently published just 2 weeks ago, reflects actually very well that the COVID pandemic has been used almost all over the world maybe with the exception of Taiwan, actually as grounds to block journalists to information sources and reporting in the field. And even that journalists' work is attacked not only by state actors, but by non-state actors, by people who are doubting the COVID pandemics, like in the case of Germany, like in the case of Italy, where we really had an increase of violence against journalists and an increase of violence actually by non-state actors, movements who are questioning the governmental policies, tackling the COVID pandemic. So journalists have been finding it increasingly hard to investigate last year and report sensitive stories, and really almost all over the world. And so that's why we, as an organization, as a global watchdog organization with offices and representations all over the world, we firmly believe that publicly recognizing and enshrining an intrinsic link between the right to information and the right to health would mean that all arbitrary restrictions of the first world would also be violations of the second. And I think that's important to highlight, because this is crucial in these times, because all over the world and in democracy as in dictatorship, it was a discussed question how to balance actually fundamental values, the right to information and the right to health. And I think that's why it's so important to highlight this. And that's why we as an organization as well have been in touch last year with the World Health Organization on this, which honestly for us was a new field as well, because we haven't dealing with health authorities so far and with health institutions. But we firmly believe that the balance between the two rights would thereby be assured and would prevent the protection of public health being used as a pretext for censorship or disinformation. Violations of press freedom need to be publicly condemned. Journalists need to be considered as essential service, which is important as it's not happening all over the world, and as such must be granted exemptions from COVID measures. And this means as well that we globally need a strengthening of protection mechanisms which exist, and some could be additionally developed, we firmly believe. And maybe we can elaborate a bit in the discussion. And I want to just briefly strive one issue which has been already mentioned. It's the issue of disinformation, because it is sometimes underestimated and sometimes maybe not discussed specifically. From the beginning, we really saw that, like the virus itself, rumors and disinformations knew no borders and were and are still polluting social media, while limited to transparency, online platforms are trying to promote reliable sources of information. And that's why we recently filed a complaint against Facebook, actually, because Facebook actually promised actually in their own community standards, transparency on how to moderate as well health information and prioritization of reliable information. And we believe, given to our own investigation, that they violated their own community standards. And we filed this complaint both in France, so against Facebook France, and Facebook Ireland, because they are the European headquarters. So recent examples in terms of disinformation have been in the past months. Parallel to the vaccine rollouts, the vaccines themselves have become commodities in global public diplomacy, and the national promotion of locally produced vaccines has accelerated. And just briefly mentioning, just last week, the European External Action Service report showed that since the beginning of 2021, so recently, state-sponsored disinformation also intensified. And I think that's really important to mention, targeting in particular Western developed vaccines. One could even mention this as vaccine diplomacy. And I think this brings me to some conclusion remarks, while we argue, as Reporters Without Borders, that independent journalism is the best vaccine against disinformation. The current structure of the global information and communication space weakens democracy from the inside. Structurally talking, because it gives a competitive advantage to authoritarian regimes. Just to bring you one example, China is blocking foreign media and really blocked really sent out, blocked the BBC, is blocking Deutsche Welle, whereas Chinese state propaganda by CGTN is actually accepted in European countries. And there we see actually a gap and actually a lack of reciprocity. And I think that's actually important when we talk about competitive advantage and structural issues in terms of how to structure a global media system. And in the past, democratic safeguards were established at the national level through constitution, media regulation, and journalistic ethics. And this is actually a challenge because they are not effective in the digital age, because it's always just tackling a national framework. And that's why a final comment, Reporters Without Borders, already before the pandemic, but now it has been even more crucial. We spearheaded the initiative on information and democracy, which is basically a coalition of 42 democratic nations to operate together in a partnership. The goal of this initiative is to develop systematic responses to confront information chaos, oppose disinformation, discuss platform regulation, and secure the right to information. And this process has been supported by a core group of heads of states and governments, the UN Secretary General, and the Alliance for Multilateralism. And next concrete steps actually are actually, as we recently published the first working group, their recommendations how to end the infodemic and how to ensure viability of media by business. We will just soon will publish some recommendation on this. And this is just some comments, and I'm happy to answer some questions and discussions afterwards.
Thank you, Christian. The sentence I liked most was to say journalism is the best vaccine against disinformation. And of course, that's the essential core of our discussion this afternoon. I think we can go into depth later on in the discussion, because now we turn to Ms. Alfa Jörgilfadottir. And I'm sorry for mispronunciation. I guess you're used to it already. You're the director of the Media Commission, that is the independent regulator for media in Iceland. And prior to this job, you were the head of division of media in the Ministry of Education, Science and Culture. You've been a lecturer at the University of Iceland for 20 years. And very important for the Council of Europe, of course, you were the chair of the steering committee on Media and Information Society at the Council of Europe from 2016 to 2017. So I imagine that you have already reflected a lot on the freedom of press. Now, I think Iceland to be a very peaceful country, everybody respecting the freedom of the other persons. And I wonder what you must state. I wonder if, from your Icelandic perspective, there are any dangers at all. Thanks for speaking to us.
Thank you very much, Gigi, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for giving me the honor and the opportunity to take part in this important webinar. I would like to share a few slides with you. You mentioned, Gigi, that it was important to break things up, so that's what I will try to do. Yes. So, do you see my slides now?
Yes, we do.
Okay, excellent. As has been stated, the dissemination of information by government is immensely important aspect of the efforts to promote effective disease control measures, while at the same time also combating fear and anxiety in society. And as we know, uncertainty can serve as a fertile ground for rumors or misinformation that can be harmful consequences. And in Iceland, I think that we did this quite well. So this is why I call this Iceland best practices, because I can't really all the things that Christian was mentioning is not really something that I can mirror in what happened in Iceland for the past a year or more. So what I would like to talk about here is I would first like to, sorry, I have problems with, okay, here it goes. Yes, you can see the changes. Yeah, so I would like to stress the point of the regular press briefings that we held here in Iceland from the end of February 2020, in addition to an information website for COVID-19 that was also maintained and was provided then information in 11 languages. So the Director of Health and the Department of Civil Protection, as well as the Emergency Management of the National Commissioner of Police, has or devoted concerted efforts at disseminating information through the news media. And this was being done in the press conferences, and you can see the so-called trio on the screen there, and through interviews or by providing background information. So we had enormous public trust. The news media had a significant role, of course, in playing and disseminating important information to the public, and in news reporting, and also in presenting foreign news in an Icelandic context. And the news media provided live webcast and broadcast and disseminated a variety of content and news about the epidemic. And both newspapers and broadcast journalists were given the opportunity to question these experts, and it was mainly the three of them that you see on the screen there, in these regular briefings that were held at approximately 11 o'clock every day when the pandemic was at its peak. And this was to shed light on the information and give the journalists and also then the general public access to the people who had the best knowledge of what was actually happening. And as you can see, there was a lot of people who were watching these press conferences. And we also see that this trio, which is, you can see there are two men and a woman, and this is the Director of Health, the Chief Epidemiologist, and then the Chief Constable of the Department of Civil Protection. So they were the ones on these meetings. And the trust that was being measured both in June and then again in August last year showed that there was more than 95% trust in what was actually being this information and what they were actually telling the people and so forth. And these are really exceptional numbers, I think, if we look in the European kind of comparison. So this shows, I think, the importance of regular press briefings, and also shows that the media and the general public should have access to the people with the highest knowledge in crisis situations. So I also want to mention that this is a country where we are quite used to crisis. I am now sitting in my office here, and about 30 to 40 kilometers away, a volcanic eruption started on the 23rd of March this year. And basically what the government did was just to set up another trio of experts to inform people about that natural catastrophe. So I think that we may say that the pandemic was handled by the government in Iceland in a similar way as we do with natural catastrophes. And I'm sure that everybody remembers Eyjafjallajökull eruptions in 2010, because that was a catastrophe that had an impact on not only Iceland but all over both Europe and the US. So another part that I wanted to mention, and this is also to show how important the media workers are, the journalists and everybody who is then, providing all this important information to the public, is that the Media Commission proposed to the Department of Civil Protection and Emergency Management on March 20th, and this is when the pandemic is rising in Iceland, that journalists and reporters should be added to the list of frontline workers who have priority to school and preschool services during the COVID-19. And the National Commissioner's Office confirmed this proposal the same day, and the media workers in newsrooms with defined editorial board were added to this list. And I think that this shows also the quick response by the authorities in times of crisis, and also the common understanding that news media has such an important role to play in providing useful and accurate information to the general population, especially, in the time of crisis. Another best practices that I would like to mention is the Icelandic Web of Science, because while there is no way of stopping, of course, the flood of false or misleading information about dangerous disease that demands responsible behavior of the general population, it is important to educate people and offer ready access to facts. In this situation, the COVID situation, the importance of science and expert knowledge and collaboration in as many areas as possible is clear to everyone. And in order to make it easier for the news media and also the general public in Iceland to check reliable information, because there were so many rumors and disinformation going on, as we know, around COVID-19, the Icelandic Web of Science, which is run by the University of Iceland, provided valuable information for the general public. And this was being done by the Web of Science, that they the journalists could verify information related to COVID-19 and reach out to scientists through the editors of the Web of Science to verify information regarding the pandemic, and thus get access to the people at the university who are doing the research and have the best knowledge on this situation. So, and all the answers to all the questions can be viewed in a special section at this Web of Science, and it's entitled COVID-19 Informed Discussion, and this is the screen with some questions, and they are all in Icelandic, unfortunately, but you can see at least how this looks. We have also talked about the advertising revenues that were going down significantly, and this was happening at the same time when the news media was even so important, and people were really relying on news media to gather information, and we can see that the use was going up and so forth. And even though in Iceland we estimate that the ad revenues dropped about 10 to 15% in 2020, the Icelandic Parliament agreed in April last year to provide financial support for the private media to address this a drop in advertising revenues. Applicants could receive a support amount to a maximum of 25% of the salary cost and contract payments, and this is like journalists and photojournalists and so forth, so those who are working in the editorial rooms. And the total funding was 400 million Icelandic kronas, which is about 2.5 million euros. And this was distributed among the applicants. And the applications were submitted to the Icelandic Media Commission, and they had to fulfill a certain criteria put forth in a regulation. And we received 26 applications, and in total 23 of them fulfilled the criteria and received financial support. And this was the first time that the government provided financial support for private media companies in this way. We have also talked about this infodemic that was spreading at the same pace as the pandemic itself. And so we see that at this time, it was immensely important to have good sources of information. But we also saw that there was a lot of disinformation that was spreading around, and mostly then on social media. So in May 2020, the Icelandic Media Commission launched an awareness campaign in order to help people detect fake news and disinformation. And this campaign was called Stop, Think, Check, and was a collaboration between the Media Commission, the Director of Health, and that's one of the parts in this trio that I talked to you about. And also the third partner was the University of Iceland's Web of Science that I also mentioned. And this was independently done by us, but we got ad credits from Facebook to be able to have a great reach on social media, both on Facebook and on Instagram. So this awareness campaign was based on a Norwegian campaign that our colleagues in the Norwegian Media Authority had already done, and it was translated and adapted for Icelandic audiences. And this is a similar campaign as we're running also in Ireland, Stop, Think, Check, and also Share in the UK. So the focus of the campaign was to increase people's awareness about fake news and also the ability to detect them. And the aim was to enhance critical thinking and media literacy, and also to highlight the importance of professional media journalism at these times of crisis. The campaign focused specifically on misstatements and misleading information related to coronavirus pandemic, the COVID-19. And one part of the campaign was a video highlighting the catchphrase of the campaign, Stop, Think, Check, and the importance of critical thinking. And the participants also, they could take a quiz online to learn more about the difference between disinformation and news from professional media. And there was also extensive information on the matter available on the website of the Media Commission. And we had about 14,000 people coming to the website, visiting our website to take a look at that, which is quite a lot in a country with 350,000 people. The campaign gained a lot of attention. We had about 2 million views. The campaign reached about 230,000 Icelanders through Facebook and Instagram, like I told you. And this is about 2/3 of the Icelandic population. So I hope that this gives you some insight into how one small European country handled the pandemic and also the infodemic that followed. And I think that there are some good practices in Iceland that could be useful for other countries to hear about when it comes to crisis management. Like I said, we are a small country in the North Atlantic, but with an active volcano just 30, 40 kilometers away, spewing up as we're speaking, I think that we can say that we are used to very different crisis situations. So thank you very much, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Gufadottir. I can tell that my expectations were met, because Iceland seems a country that seems to manage real well. Thank you for stressing, as a journalist, of course, I'm thankful that you stressed the financial aspect, the financial support from media, very important, even though it feels strange if the government gives money for private press. Now I'd like to remind everybody that you can take part. Please do so. Use our chat function. Please join in and make remarks. It would be, for a moderator, it's always bad if there's no reaction whatsoever. I can see there's 89 participants, but if nobody says anything, it's very disagreeable for me. So please just write down your remarks, whatever you want to say to the things you've heard so far. Now I have the honor to announce Christos Giacomakopoulos, the Director General of Human Rights and Rule of Law of the Council of Europe. Mr. Giacomakopoulos, we saw you already in the video, but let me introduce a little more. You've been working for the Council of Europe since 2006 in different positions. I've read that. You have also held posts in the registry of the European Court of Human Rights, in the Venice Commission, and the director in the Office of the Commissioner for Human Rights. Now, Mr. Giacomakopoulos, thank you for speaking to us. But may I humbly ask, being an ambassador for human rights, aren't you sometimes frustrated with the development of things, considering that the fighting for the freedom of the press is a never-ending task? What can the Council of Europe do? Thank you for speaking to us.
Well, thank you very much. I thank you for giving me the floor, but not necessarily for this very difficult question that you asked me, whether I am frustrated or not. Sometimes, yes, we are frustrated, in particular in the field of freedom of expression, where I must say, and this is not my own finding, but it is a finding of the 47 member states of the Council of Europe, that freedom of expression and freedom of media is under stress, and that we have experienced in the last years restriction of the freedom of expression. Actually, this crisis that we have been through, and we are still in it, has had a bad impact on human rights and also on freedom of expression. But at the same time, it has highlighted, it has accentuated the challenges that already existed. And from this perspective, it is also an opportunity to learn how to better manage this, the challenges, how to better equip our authorities, our states, with real tools to increase the resilience of media and of freedom of expression to such threats. Actually, the crisis has shown that there is an extraordinary demand for accurate, reliable, and timely information, not only for the public, but also for the authorities, for the parliaments, for governments, for the health system, even for science. So I think that from this perspective, it has also shown how important the right to information and media freedom is. And also, while over the last years we've seen somehow that social media have been on the uprise for many years, many people, and I think that ELFA has shown it that perfectly well, many people have returned in this crisis more towards more traditional quality media in order to obtain well-investigated and reliable news and information. And it has also, of course, in this respect, also increased the responsibility of media actors in times of crisis. From our perspective, from the Council of Europe, as we see the situation, let me just see where we stand. We have seen obstacles to reporting, first of all. There have been obstacles to reporting, travel restrictions, press credentials that have not been recognized, restricted access to press conferences. Sometimes, by the way, these obstacles to reporting were not coming from state actors, and this is interesting, but most, I would say quite often, by private actors. In demonstrations, for instance, it happens quite often that it is the demonstrations themselves who prevent the press from reporting. On the other hand, it is positive that member states have generally, I would say, refrained from having an excessive control of information. There have not been massive examples of attempts to limit freedom of expression and media freedom, but many states also provided a very comprehensive and reliable information themselves to the public. And this, I think, has been very much appreciated. Unfortunately, we have also saw that in the efforts to fight misinformation, to manage this infodemic, as the World Health Organization has put it, there have been sometimes some law enforcement practices, or even sometimes legislative practices that have seriously impacted freedom of expression. We have had examples of non-judicial takedown of news, requests of blocking, or sometimes of whole websites being blocked without any possibility of judicial review. At the same time, experience has shown that the cooperation with internet intermediaries, with platforms, and the media stakeholders is very capable to reduce manipulation of public opinion. So there are quite a lot of lessons to be learned from this. I was not supposed to speak about that, but as Mr. Roth has referred to it, we have also experienced during the crisis hostility to journalists, serious hostility, in serious cases leading to imprisonment, to harassment, to threats. And I think that you, Gigi, you yourself have underlined this in your introduction. So what can the Council of Europe do about that? We cannot avoid mentioning that despite the efforts of media, of some state authorities, of the public, freedom of expression in media continues to decline in many countries. Therefore, I think that the Council of Europe has set some priorities. I will explain to them. I think that some of them also will address the points that were made by Christian. Not all the points that were made by Christian, but some of them at least. So first of all, we will increase the efforts of an effective implementation of our standards on safety of journalists. I think safety of journalists has been an ever-increasing concern for our organization in the past decade. It has become even more an issue, matter of concern now. We have noticed that during the pandemic, journalists were often in situations of multiple vulnerability. They were exposed to health risks, and at the same time, they were facing various threats and attacks, sometimes, as was mentioned, physical attacks too. And this, as I said, do not necessarily originate all the time from state representatives. So in response, we will encourage our member states to adopt national plans, national action plans on the safety of journalists. Of course, these plans need to be adapted to each state, but it is important, we believe, that national action plans for the safety of journalists become a tool for freedom of expression. Secondly, we will provide further guidance to slow down the spread of disinformation and hate speech online. We will continue to address the negative human rights impact caused by this phenomena, in particular online, through several instruments and also through empowerment tools. We are preparing now a recommendation on a comprehensive approach in addressing hate speech, with sections specifically dedicated to online expression of hate. We will also prepare an instrument to provide specific guidance to states, but also to other stakeholders in the area of content moderation, which has become now an important issue. Content moderation, in particular on online platforms. Third, we will continue to promote values and measures which are conducive to an environment for quality journalism. The pandemic, as we all saw, has underscored the value of facts and expert knowledge. We need to have more quality, more ethical journalism, and journalism that relies on verified and trusted sources, that at the same time scrutinizes governmental information and policies and avoids sensational narratives. So our organization will continue to promote these practices through guidance to empower quality journalism, also through concrete cooperation projects with individual member states. And finally, we need to improve the resilience of member states' legal systems against abuses that aim to silence critical voices and media freedom. During the pandemic, a number of information sources have experienced censorship on COVID-related information, and the measures ranged from wholesale blocking of websites, as I said, to broadcast bans generally. Another concern is, which comes also within the area of attempts to silence critical voices, is the abusive lawsuits against the journalists and against media. These are, call them SLAPs, and strategic litigation against public participation. We are all familiar with this term, I suppose. These are usually characterized by an imbalance of power between the plaintiff and the respondent, and they are also characterized by some abuse of the judicial processes for purposes that are not necessarily the ones those of vindicating a right, just to harass, to create a fear for that. And I think this is an important issue for which, by the way, also the European Union shows interest. And I think that the combination of European Union and the Council of Europe could allow us to tackle this phenomenon effectively. And as announced by our Secretary General, in a month's time we will have a conference of our member states ministers responsible for media and information society. This conference is to address the changes in the media environment, and the ministers are expected to commit to concrete action to curb this dangerous backsliding that we have today on freedom of expression, and that they will commit to measures that will reinforce resilience of freedom of expression and media freedom in times of crisis. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christos Giacomakopoulos. I've been reading in the meantime remarks, and there have been remarks. I have to thank you very much that you made the effort to write something in our chat function. And these two remarks, last two remarks, are addressed for Christos, and I might just read them to you. There's, of course, I don't know how to pronounce Zoe Pache, who asks for Christos, what are your thoughts on awarding journalists special sanitary status in the same way in which nurses and other key workers have been afforded essential worker status? What do you think about that? You want to answer, Christos?
Yes, with pleasure. But I'm not sure that I understand very well the question. I think, and as some of you have already said, that journalists are essential in times of crisis. And this has been shown more than ever during this crisis, because they are the only ones who are able to inform the public in a, let's say, in a convincing manner, because they inform about whatever happens, not on an one-sided information. And this debate is part of the information and the policy. If you only receive one-sided information, then this is not information. So I think that the crisis has shown that journalists are essential workers. Whether this has to be now, they have to be qualified as such and be given an identity card with this. I mean, this is something that is perhaps beyond my competence. What I would really love to see is that the work of journalists is better respected by the states and by the private actors too.
As a journalist, of course, I have to agree to you that we should be respected very much. Now I'm trying to read the second question. Pavo Lumiste asks a question regarding the COE platform for the protection of journalism and safety of journalists. How to further strengthen and empower the platform to make it more impactful? Which linkages with other structures could be developed in this regard? Thank you very much for this timely talk, is the remark. So again, I wonder if maybe, Christos, you're the best person to ask. To strengthen and empower the platform.
Yes, the platform is an extraordinary tool, actually, and it is. I think that has not yet developed completely all its potential, but it is doing it. I'm sure that Christian will come into this. I think that one of the seen from the point of view of an intergovernmental organization, what we need is to make states react more promptly and more collectively in the manner of a peer pressure, let's say, to the alerts that are posted on the platform. I think that this is the what we need to do. But I will leave it to Christian perhaps to be more precise on that. Thank you.
And
no, maybe just one. Yeah, sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. Just one brief comment. I think because sometimes I see that's a tragedy. Sometimes I feel about the Council of Europe I find tremendously important, the Council of Europe, of course. But sometimes in the Western democracies, sometimes the role of the Council of Europe, I would say, is underestimated somewhere, even if it's important for all of us. And the platform and safety of journalists, I have to say, it's really, I think it's from our own experience, so relevant, so important for violations of press freedom in the Council of Europe regions, because actually it's a really great platform really for bringing attacks, violations of press freedom to an international level, and sometimes personally being based in a Western country like Berlin, but having the whole world in mind and traveling all over, I made the experience that this platform really has such a crucial, important role in so many countries, because it's really a unique platform for highlighting cases and leveraging cases. And so I think, of course, it's not. Yeah, it needs more promotion, but I think we should not underestimate this role. And this was a PR speech for this platform, but I think I'm really, and I'm not paid for it, but it's just my own experience with this platform.
Thank you. Christos, you wanted to say something.
Oh, I just wanted to add that one of the development of the platform will very much depend on the understanding of authorities of member states that this is not a name and shame tool. It is a tool that will make them react rapidly to threats to media freedom, and that they can through this tool take the necessary measures and ultimately prevent even cases from reaching Darian Pavli at some stage, because there will be the cases of violation of freedom of expression will be dealt with effectively by domestic authorities properly, without needing to become an international litigation. Thank you.
Well, I expected Mr. Pavli is happy if he doesn't have to decide too many cases because they're regulated before. Now it's 40 minutes past 3, and I'm supposed to announce a coffee break. There's still more questions. I have seen them, and please, those who have written, don't feel disrespected. I think we have a second round of discussion, and I can put your questions there, and we can, because they're rather general questions, and we won't leave the subject. They will make sense in the second discussion as well. I want to thank Darian Pavli, Gilfa Dottir, Christian Mier, and Christos Giacomopoulou for the first round. It was very lively, and I've learned quite a lot, even though I've already read a lot about this subject. Anyway, you please take a coffee or a tea and come back in about 10 minutes, 10 to 4. We'll continue the whole thing, and we'll look at the concrete situation of journalists. I think this can be very lively again. Please be there. I'll be happy. Thank you. I hope everybody is back. We'll start the second panel. In the first panel, we talked about the standards, the abstract level that a democratic society should try to protect. Now we will try to clarify what are the concrete conditions of work for journalists in this crisis? We've touched that already quite a bit, but let's have a closer look. What are the difficulties? How can the press be accurate in times of fake news and social media? How can journalists do a good job and be trusted, as the video in the beginning mentioned? Let me again present the experts. I see 3 of 4 possible experts. Let me see. Scott Griffin, you're there, aren't you? Thank you for coming. Wonderful. Mira Selva, I can see you, Mira. And Christine Olsen, I can also tell you that you're there. But Mr. Leusch is not there. Is it true? Is this possible? We can continue, even though, I mean, well, maybe he'll show up in time when it's his part. Okay, our first panel, Scott Griffin, a true expert on independent journalism because he's the deputy director of the International Press Institute, IPI, a global network of editors, publishers, and journalists defending press freedoms since 1950. He's the author of numerous IPI reports on diverse topics related to press freedom and independent journalism, and has led or participated in dozens of IPI press freedom missions around the world. I'm very excited to hear more about it. What do you do on a press freedom mission? I imagine that you must have a very good overview on how things develop worldwide, where freedom of press is concerned. We're happy to listen to your speech.
Thanks very much. Hi, everybody. Hope you can hear and see me well. Thanks very much for the invitation. Yeah, maybe to answer your question, well, Press Freedom Mission is an opportunity to meet with stakeholders on the ground regarding press freedom issues. And actually, we've transitioned to virtual press freedom missions over the past year, and our most recent one was in Poland, actually. And if we have time, we can speak about that, about the spread of media capture, even amid the COVID-19 pandemic. But obviously, our topic today is looking at the impact of the pandemic on independent journalism and on press freedom in the Council of Europe region. And I think it's and I have to apologize that I missed the first half of the event, so you'll forgive me if I repeat anything from the first half. But I think it's worth for me to start a little bit from the recent report of the platform of the Council of Europe, which I heard mentioned as I caught the tail end of the previous session, and that report really highlights the damage that was done by the pandemic in terms of press freedom and independent journalism. It states very clearly that responses by state authorities to COVID-19 led to serious challenges to press freedom, and that governments implemented an array of measures that restricted journalists' ability to cover the public health situation freely. And I'm going to mention a couple of different challenges and threats that we as IPI analyzed over the past year, and we're in a good position to do that. Starting right at the beginning of the pandemic, IPI began collecting data about press freedom violations related in some way to the COVID-19 pandemic, categorizing them by topic, really to understand what we were looking at. I mean, from our side, we felt at the beginning that this would be a big challenge, and it was. So beginning at the end of February 2020, early March 2020, we began collecting this data at a global level. And if you look at our COVID-19 press freedom tracker, we have about 635 press freedom violations related to COVID globally. And in the end, this isn't it's not a perfect quantitative analysis because we can't capture every incident, but it does give a picture of the types of issues that we're looking at and some of the hotspots, so to speak. But as I said, what I would like to do is just sort of briefly give an overview of the types of incidents that we saw in Europe over the past year, and where we are, and then we can have a more detailed discussion perhaps after that. But the first issue that came up, of course, was the issue of emergency legislation. We all know that, and I'm sure this came up in the previous session, that certain situations may allow for restrictions on fundamental rights, including free expression, but all of these restrictions need to be necessary, they need to be proportionate, and they need to be time limited. And unfortunately, developments in a number of member states, Council of Europe member states, raised alarm about the use of state of emergency to usher in disproportionate restrictions on free expression. If you look at Hungary, which had an emergency bill criminalizing the spread of false and distorted information about the pandemic, but also, of course, in Russia, where we had a fake news law that was used as a censorship tool. And this really mirrors a wider global trend that we have seen. This isn't restricted to Europe, but we've seen a number of examples of these states of emergency being used to pass fake news, so-called fake news laws in the name of fighting disinformation. And the threat here is not just that that these laws are used to restrict information about the pandemic, which is bad enough. I think it's also that that they remain a permanent part of the legal framework, that they're retooled, readjusted to block information about other issues as they arise. So this is really a trend that we have seen most recently, actually, in Malaysia, going outside of Europe, where the government bypassed Parliament completely to pass a so-called fake news law that criminalizes information about the pandemic and about the state of emergency itself. So this is a huge chunk of issues that we looked at. The second area is about access to information, and I think it's we don't need to spend a lot of time explaining why access to information is so critical during the pandemic. But unfortunately, our monitoring showed that, in fact, governments tended towards keeping tighter control over information and data. And this manifested in a number of forms. That we saw the creation of new administrative and procedural hurdles for journalists to access decision makers, places of public interest, press conferences. We had examples where journalist questions were being filtered, through chats before they were sent to government officials. And I would highlight as for us, what was possibly the most concerning was restrictions on journalists accessing healthcare facilities and speaking independently with healthcare workers. And this is an example of where restrictions are being justified in the name of health measures. But in the end, in many cases, we saw that it was really about preventing journalists from gathering independent information. I point to the example of Hungary. We had just, and this is still going on. I mean, we saw just a few weeks ago, coalition of independent news organizations in Hungary publishing an open letter requesting access to healthcare workers and talking about the fact that, they hit a brick wall every time that they attempted to access this type of information, to speak to people in charge. And they're also the subject, of in many cases, an information boycott from public officials. And this has an impact not only on the public's right to information, but it also damages and undermines the wider work of the media. People realize that they're not getting the data and information that they need. We also had, in other cases, freedom of information deadlines being extended or being removed altogether. And I think, the situation was new. It was understood that governments were under a lot of pressure, and the desire to have sort of this smooth crisis management, this message control, I think is on one level understandable, but of course it's wrong from the perspective of free expression and the public's right to information. And I think this remains a struggle. A third area that we identified over the past year, and this is something that I would say also changed over the course of the year in terms of our monitoring, are the attacks on the physical attacks on journalists and the attacks on physical safety. Towards the beginning of the pandemic, this was more, we had incidents in which police were blocking journalists from reporting during lockdown. But over the course of the year, this really tended starkly towards attacks on journalists by members of the public. In particular, those covering anti-lockdown protesters, and this is still going on. And I think that there's little question for us that this violence is being partially fueled by an already existing environment in which certain politicians, certain power holders have sought to smear journalists as political actors to undermine the credibility of independent media. And this is, we see journalists being targeted online as well, being targeted with abuse, threats, intimidation, smear campaigns. And in a way, the COVID-19 pandemic has provided yet another field for that to occur. Journalists being smeared as political actors, journalists being smeared somehow as colluding with the government around public health measures. And as I said, this manifested in a number of attacks. I believe close to 100 physical attacks on journalists that we categorized over the past year across the Council of Europe region. Again, journalists doing their job, covering demonstrations, but being targeted. And as I said, I think this is partly fruit of years of efforts to smear journalists as political actors. Certain efforts are bearing fruit, and by that I mean that independent media have been under financial pressure, deliberate financial pressure by certain governments in the Council of Europe region, especially in countries where we see the state capture model occurring. That they've been denied public funds, that they have been they've been operating in an unfair media market that has been weakening their ability to do their job. And this really hit home then during the pandemic as an extra source of pressure. So this is of great concern to us. And the other thing to mention here is that, as we see still, and this will continue, the distribution of public funds, different ways of supporting independent media that have been hit by the pandemic, it does open doors for greater political influence. And we already saw examples of this during, over the past year, in which in some cases, financial support packages came with certain strings attached, or loyal publications were rewarded, while in some cases critical media were ignored. So this is something that we really need to have in mind as well. And the fifth element, that is coming up, and this is, I think, going to be increasingly an issue for the media, is surveillance. And we all know that the pandemic has been accompanied by an accelerated effort to track citizens, whether that's for public health reasons or for other reasons in the background. But this will have an impact on journalists, on journalists' ability to do their work free from constant surveillance by the government, but also their ability to communicate with sources. And I think this is only going to become a greater problem. So just very briefly, and I think this is also set forth clearly in the Council of Europe report that was published just a few weeks ago. IPI is a member of the Council of Europe platform together with many other organizations, and there's just 4 key recommendations, and I'll mention these very briefly. The first is, that any state measures need to be proportionate, temporary, and time limited, and of course that emergency measures must not be used as a pretext to restrict the rights of journalists. The second one is, ensuring that efforts to counter disinformation are not abused to censor reporting around the pandemic, that access to information is provided. The third is, related to surveillance in the end, that measures to track infections or other public health developments are not used as a backdoor surveillance opportunity that infringes on journalists' rights. And finally, authorities need to investigate all attacks on journalists and provide sufficient protection to journalists covering demonstrations. So this is a very rapid flyover view of what we've seen during the pandemic. Looking forward to discussing this more, and I think also, as we see the effect of the vaccines, to understand, what the next phase will be, how we can exit from the situation, and ensure in particular that the emergency restrictions that have made journalists' life and work more difficult, to ensure that these will be rolled back. Thank you.
A very precise picture. The picture you painted, I think, something that Christian Mir already described it, but in the first panel. But I was very happy that we have another picture painted, which is very similar to what the other experts said. So thank you for contributing here. Now we have our next speaker, Mira Selva. Mira, while preparing this event, I've been listening to a speech you've held on YouTube about how women consume and talk about news around the world. That was already very interesting. As a director of the Journalist Fellowship Program at the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism, and the deputy director of the Reuters Institute, I'm sure you reflect a lot on how people consume media. Then please share your insight with us. You can tell us more about news consumption and trust in the news during the COVID crisis. The floor is yours.
Thanks very much. Thank you very much, Gigi. Really nice to meet you all. And thanks, Scott. A lot of what I would have said, I completely agree with Scott, the trends in what we're seeing on the threats to press freedom, both financial and political and practical, the access to data. What I thought I would do to kind of supplement that is focus a bit more on the audience side of things. And let me just start with a very quick some statistics on basically what is news for. So we talk about journalism, we talk about press freedom, and what we try to do at the Reuters Institute with some of our research is take it back to the audience and say, here's the news, what do you need it for? How do you use it? What's it for? And we have a survey of digital news consumption patterns around the world in over 38 different countries. We gather the data from January to March. So if you think back to last January to March, it was just before the pandemic hit. So what we did last year was extend the survey questions a little bit into April. So we had some data from the start of the pandemic. And what we asked then was, what do you think about the news media coverage of the coronavirus in April 2020? And what we found, and this is a global survey, we found that 60% of people said at the time that they agree that the media has helped them to understand the crisis. 65% has helped agree that the media has helped explain what they can do in the crisis. And 32% say that the media exaggerated the impact of the crisis. Now, this isn't bad data when you kind of compare earlier years where we asked people, do you think the news is useful to you or relevant to you? Quite a lot of people, in some cases more than half, will say, no, it's not relevant to my lives. So what was really clear at the beginning of the pandemic was the vital importance of news. And it was not inevitable at all that the onset of the pandemic should have resulted in this assault of the press that we've seen, that got outlined, because in a public health emergency, most authorities accept that it's vital to communicate with the public that's hungry for information. And the most effective way of doing that can be via the news media, whether that's online or in broadcast and in print. And what we saw is when the pandemic began, that's exactly what people did do. They turned to the media in ways that they hadn't been before. So the narrative of people turning away from the news and being disinterested in the news stopped. And we collected some data in 6 countries, Argentina, Britain, Germany, South Korea, Spain, and the US in March and early April. And what we found then is that news consumption went right up and people went online or they turned to the televisions to get their information about the crisis. But then as the pandemic spread, you started to see this crackdown on journalism. And I won't go into that too much because I think it's already been covered. But we divided into kind of roughly 5 areas: the misuse of emergency legislation, the clampdown on unpatriotic reporting, the idea of tallying how your country is doing compared to other countries, which still exists over the vaccine rollout, restrictions on travel and press passes, which meant that journalists literally couldn't get to the ground, abuse of misinformation laws, and an attack on whistleblowers. And again, a lot of these have been covered. So let me just stick to 2 things in particular, misinformation, and the other thing we're concerned about, which is information inequality. So as Scott said, we've had a lot of kind of anti-fake news laws passed, ostensibly to clamp down on misinformation, but in reality have been used to quell dissent, quell independent journalism, and essentially control the public narrative. In our study, kind of global concerns about misinformation remain quite high. So even before the coronavirus crisis hit, more than half our global sample of audiences said they were concerned about what was true or false on the internet when it comes to news. But what's also really interesting here is that domestic politicians are the single most frequently named source of misinformation. So the misinformation is coming right from the top, from the leaders, according to the audiences. This might not be true, but this is how it's perceived. And then what you start getting is a kind of pick your side type of attitude to misinformation. So if you agree with the people in charge, you think what they're saying is true. If you disagree with what they're saying in charge, if you disagree with them, you don't say I disagree, you say they're fake news. But then what's really crucial to remember here is that WhatsApp is far more responsible for misinformation and news in many parts of the world, including Brazil and Malaysia and lots of pockets of Europe as well. The other thing I just want to really look at is information inequality, because we looked at some data in the UK and we continue to look at data in the UK throughout last year, because we wanted to see whether this kind of initial interest in news was sustained. And what we found was that after this initial surge in news use, news consumption in the UK really started returning to pre-crisis levels, but then news avoidance grew, people just not watching the news at all. And trust in key sources of COVID-19 news and information also declined. And so digital platforms, social media, video sharing sites, messaging applications, search engines, saw high levels of use throughout the crisis and often promoted official health communication as politicians and governments became more adept at using these channels for their message. But they've also, of course, had serious problems with misinformation. And as a result, they're just not trusted as effective channels for accurate information on the coronavirus. What you've seen in the UK was a dramatic decline in public trust in the UK government as a source of information about COVID-19 and a significant increase in the number of the people who see the UK itself as a source of potentially false or misleading information about the coronavirus. I think this is changing again with the vaccine rollout, where the messaging has been very different, far more positive and very effective in the UK. And I think you're seeing kind of levels of trust building back up. But COVID-19 itself wasn't a great success story for either the UK government or the UK media. And what we are really concerned about is quite a large minority of the UK public, 20 million, so it's, one in about 30%, do not feel that the news media or the government have explained what they can do in response to the pandemic, and they don't feel that it's relevant to their lives. And so this kind of information inequality is a real and growing problem. And what's really concerning here is that you see systematic inequalities around age, gender, income, and education. And it's growing fast. So you started at the start of last year with about 8 million people, and then it's really gone up to about 8%, and then it's gone up to about 15% of the population really not feeling that they can access the news they need. And these people are amongst the most vulnerable, both in terms of health and economic situation, and also kind of access to political life. So they're the ones who might really fall through the gap. And this infodemically vulnerable group is also more likely to use social media, such as Facebook and Twitter. But crucially, then this is really important to remember, the BBC is still the most widely used source of news in all categories, including the infodemically vulnerable. So public sector broadcasting, reliable, well-funded public sector journalism is still really important, despite all the noise and fury about bias and polarization and funding. It's still the thing that people turn to the most. And it's often the thing that's quite hard to measure. We don't have the same data that we have with the digital news report. And I don't want to kind of end on a kind of down note, but the access to data is a really interesting question, because, Scott, you're absolutely right that there's just been a blankness in the kind of data that's been made available to journalists. And given that they're unable to go down and report on the ground, this has really been a kind of effective way of controlling the narrative. But what we are beginning to see in some countries, India, Brazil, Nicaragua, is that journalists are beginning to figure out how to crowdsource and collect their own data. And again, use social media, use the tools at their disposal, use the kind of use the expertise they've built up in fact checking and crowdsourcing and user-generated content, skills they've built up over the year. They're beginning to use it to collect data sets. You're seeing it in India now, where journalists are kind of literally going to crematoriums and counting the dead themselves and pooling the data so they get an accurate death rate. So there is kind of innovation. And I think there's a real space here for the international community to go back in to provide these platforms where people can gather data and then disseminate it in a kind of accurate, trusted, reliable way. It used to happen. It was something that used to happen in about 2006, 2007. I remember the UN, the EU kind of trying to offer these services. And then when kind of crowdsourcing grew over the internet and journalists just began going directly to Twitter themselves, it felt like there wasn't a need. But we're now in a state of emergency in so many countries, and there is so much more misinformation out there, that I think there could be a real appetite for kind of structured institutional crowdsourcing data gathering to fill in the gaps that national governments create by not opening up the data themselves. And I'll stop there. Thank you. I think you're muted, Gigi. I can't hear you.
Here I am. Thank you very much for your speech, especially focusing on the platform to collect data. That's a new proposition that we haven't heard so far, but I think that's a very productive idea. We can follow that later on. There's a question which I will mention right now, because is the study, Mira Selva, is the study published? So where can I find it? maybe you want to send it in the chat, that you can respond to it.
Yeah, I'll put it in the chat. And this is a public study that was published last June, so the new report will be out in a few weeks' time as well. But I'll put the last year's in the chat.
Okay, great. Now we hear another interesting speech in the second panel. Patrick Leuch is, if I may say so, a former colleague of mine because I used to work for Deutsche Welle. But of course, I was only a simple journalist. Patrick Leuch is the head of the European affairs within the Directorate General Management of Deutsche Welle since 2017. In this role, he is responsible for relations with European organizations and institutions, thus overseeing and coordinating lobbying and advocacy effort. Before, Mr. Leuch was CEO of the Deutsche Welle Media Services GmbH and director of the programs of the Global Media Forum. So we have somebody here who is very good in overlooking the international and especially the European political developments that were influenced by the COVID-19 crisis. Patrick, how has Deutsche Welle adapted? What are your working methods these days? Floor to you.
Thank you very much, Gigi. Not sure you can see me because on my screen I'm not appearing myself. Maybe it's fine. Thank you very much for inviting us. Sorry?
I can see you.
That's good. Thank you very much for inviting us. This is a challenging time for media. This is a challenging time for journalists, and it's great that the German Presidency and the Council of Europe is looking in the effects on media the way you do the whole afternoon. Very inspiring speakers and discussion. Thank you very much. I will share some slides to change a little bit habits here, if I'm able to change. I'm not sure. I cannot see myself on the list of speakers, so I cannot share my screen, obviously. There is two good news at the beginning. The first is there is a huge hunger for reliable information that has been stressed by other speakers. As Deutsche Welle, global broadcaster with 31 languages, we see that clearly in all the figures. We increased within 1 year our unique viewers per week from 194 million to 260 million. Which is huge. And this is not only to us that this is happening, it's to many media. So there is, due to the situation of the pandemic, due to the threat that people are feeling and living, there is a tremendous interest and hunger for reliable information. And all the serious media, public media, local media are profiting from that push. First, when the pandemic started, the first aim was to cover the pandemic. So we did COVID-19 specials and all the rest of the stuff that everyone did at the beginning. And that is where people turned to get information about the pandemic. But after a couple of weeks and months, we understood that people remain with the news offers. Even if you stop doing special reporting on COVID the same way than you did maybe at the beginning, people stayed tuned. And that is very good news because it turned a lot of people back to reliable news, I guess. And media have a great chance to sustain again the relation to audience and position themselves as navigators to a very VUCA and disrupted reality. And this is the second point. This is the challenge for media, because you have to navigate now between governments that limit freedom of citizens. you have opposing social NGO groups or civil society groups. You have the doubters. You have the disinformation. You have all kind of rumors. So it became a real complex world. And through the pandemic, even as Mira said before, the narratives are even more disrupted and complicated to read. So there is a huge challenge for journalists to do the right job, to differentiate in assessing all these measures that are put from governments on citizens, but citizens' beliefs and all these science things that turns around the pandemic. So huge challenges. And journalists are doing this under very severe conditions. For Deutsche Welle in March 2020, we put 85% of the staff at home. We ran magazines only remote, without anyone in any studio in our TV studios in Berlin. So for social media, for online, it's rather easy job. But for TV, it's rather complicated job to do that remote. So after a while, obviously, part of the staff came back under severe hygiene measures, obviously, and with very high protection to do their job. But on the other hand, we have still 70% of the staff working from home. What happened at the same time is a huge shift of the whole organization from an analog media house to a digital media house. It's very interesting to see how the pandemic, for our capacities to think digitally, to establish digital leadership, to establish quite new systems of remote working and agile working. So the pandemic gave us a great deal somehow to push procedures where we all were on the way, like any other media house. But it gave a great push to everything we do now. So we are much better in digital leadership as we were a year ago. And the plan was to be, but without the pandemic, it would have taken much longer to drive the organization to be really able to live digital media. So there is also a positive effect on media houses, because from what I see, many media houses were forced to increase their capacity to work in a digital environment and to think digitally, which make them able to cope with the challenges of digital media that are ahead. And particularly to public broadcasters, that still was a hard job to do, because public broadcasters are often big, they are often slow, they are often complicated, and you can see that many big houses did a great deal in speeding up their whole procedures. So two good news: audiences are coming back to reliable information on all levels, and many media houses could manage to give their development in organizational times, in technical times, a great push. Now, what are you going to do with that? Because obviously the world remains very complicated. And yes, we also live, and this is the bad side of the coin, we also live harassments. We recently had a case where our correspondent in Kenya was hit by a tear fire bullet on the leg while covering protests against corona measures and police harassment. So it's true that all over the globe, governments don't want to see citizens in the street protesting against whatever. And there are many cases where authorities used the pandemic and the fact that they had more power and limiting on freedom. They put it against citizens, and they put it also against journalists. We have several examples where this happened to our journalists. we make a great effort to protect our journalists and correspondents all over the world, not only from such kind of dangers, but also from the risks of COVID, which is also an issue when you have freelancers all over the world that then turn to the headquarters saying, look, I'm based in Lagos. What happened if I'm get corona? What is the possibility of getting medical surgery, etc., etc. So it was a big challenge for us to secure stuff all over the world and to establish systems of protection. That is maybe a little bit special to Deutsche Welle, but I think that other global media houses like BBC or others have a similar situation. And I know from France Média Monde, for instance, from our colleagues from Paris, that they had a huge challenge to secure their stuff in Africa mainly. So I will stop here. Thank you very much. We think that yes, we have to really make an effort to keep spaces of freedom preserved and make sure that journalists can do their job, because in the pandemic, their job was never that important that it is at these times. But new challenges are coming and are coming with this situation, and the situation will obviously go on for a while.
Thank you, Patrick. Another aspect, another different perspective on the same problem of the identity of the whole big problem. Thank you for your thoughts. Now we turn to our last speech in this panel, another expert who really knows the problem. I would like to welcome Christine Olsen, Principal Advisor to the OSCE, representative on the freedom of media. Christine Olsen has worked as a journalist herself and has been internationally engaged in media freedom and freedom of expression the last 25 years via different organizations. Christine Olsen, would you please round up the subject, give your thoughts concerning the crisis and the freedom of the press, and how does the OSCE respond to the challenges for journalists? You have the floor. Yeah, we can hear you.
Can you hear me? Great. But first, before I need to say that I would like to use slides, so I will alert the kind digital moderators to prepare the slides for a while. I will tell you when. Not now. Not now, please. No, not now. So I will tell you when. But I just wanted to alert that I need your help later on. So thank you very much for this very interesting seminar today. I mean, you have touched on so many aspects of this issue and so many interesting perspectives, and many of them are covered and addressed by the Office of the Representative on Freedom of the Media, which the representative is leading an autonomous institution within the OSCE. The function is to alert states about breaches and challenges on freedom of the media, but also to assist states. And by doing so, we cooperate very much with, has some kind of bridging function, and works also very close to Council of Europe on different issues. And last year, when WHO announced the pandemic, we thought, okay, what shall we do now? All our events, all our conferences, everything will be cancelled. And we will, what shall we do? And we were so wrong. And it turned out, first we noticed that when doing digital events, we started to reach new groups. For example, women east and far east of the OSCE region, experts that didn't come to our conferences before could come. So and also business came more prevalent to the events. Just a few examples. And as you understood from all the conversations here today, we had to work really hard on all the abuses that started against all the breaches against international standards. In fact, the first period, the representative had to do 3 times as many alerts and interventions compared to normal, and due to the COVID crisis. And before I will describe a few things that representatives have done and also alert on a specific issue that I don't think. First, I'd like to also remind about the positive changes that this period had. I mean, I've been working on media freedom internationally for 25 years and seen the many faces coming. And one thing, it is quite astonishing that journalists are identified as essential workers, and it is something to keep in mind when advocating for media freedom, I'd like to say. And also that it is astonishing that journalism has become such a focus, that the value of journalism that used to be really, really challenged 20 years ago or 50 years ago, or questioned, is now actually a solution against many harmful information. So, and also, I also think it's really, really interesting that there's so many initiatives going on discussing how we can meet the failure of the market, basically, related to independent journalism. And so I see there are a new era of things coming up, and we need to keep these in mind while working onwards, also when the vaccines are working for most states. So let's see. So just already in March last year, the representative and also the other 3 international mandate holders identified the problems were coming up. And the representative at that time, Hailem Desir, was addressing the annual statement that the representative does together with the other mandate holders globally. And in this case, it was at that time the UN Special Rapporteur and the rapporteur of the Inter-American States. So they were addressing this already in March last year, identifying different issues. And very quickly, I would say, one thing that wasn't, of course, identified is how states use legislation to curb media freedom in a way that may not really be related to COVID information and not even conducive for it. And another, let's see where I am. So the first 2 months he addressed this in 11 countries, basically. And this information came very quick to be at the center of the work. And of course, this information is something that is not new for COVID, but it was sort of a used opportunity. And he addressed already in the start the value of accurate and timely and fast information from public agencies as an antidote to dismantle disinformation. And said, like, I do not think that authorities will gain much trust with the public if they are perceived as trying to hide information or curtail the media. And that was already a year ago. And today we see that the changes in legislation is more not implemented by states. And being Swedish, I can say that civil society has recently addressed that the Transparency Act of Sweden has been changed negatively 26 times in just a short period. And this in a country with 250 years of legislation securing freedom of print. But I also have to say positively that the government has listened and replied in some way, responded in some way to these concerns, and it has started an inquiry and will look into the different changes and also how the public agencies have behaved. I'd like to also reiterate the interesting presentation by Ms. Elfeir Gylfadóttir from Iceland, showing different positive ways of working by the state. So 6 months back, we have a new representative, the distinguished Ms. Teresa Ribeiro. And in her first regular report to the OSCE states next week, actually, she will address many of the things that are connected to COVID-19 and media freedom. And it is unfortunately continuing. And she will, what has been identified is, of course, by us, how disinformation is harming media freedom. And for example, by undermining the public trust in the media. There's claims there's nothing to trust in the media. Individual journalists shouldn't be trusted by a variety of reasons that really doesn't have to do with the content they are discussing. So, and this is an effect of disinformation also related to COVID. And it calls for harm on media freedom because it breaks the international professional standards that has been in use by discussing false information, and media-like, journalistic-like entities spread information. And it's difficult for people, of course, to see the difference at some points. So it's really a problem. And also, this information harms the sources available for journalists. So we have seen so far that the lack of trusted and timely information by public agencies has been a problem. If the public agencies can't contribute with the trust and information, what sources should the journalists use? They are not medical experts themselves. And the work becomes much harder, of course, and the disinformation and narrative gets fuel from this. We've also seen that public service media outlets that do not really have an editorial independence and are curtailed, I would mean, to present different perspectives. They have an immense impact on this information because they reach a large audience with this information. So there's many problems with media freedom here, not just related to safety, of course. Let me give you a few examples of what the representative plans to do. And since January, when she took office, we have presented a report about how to address journalists during protests and demonstrations. And next week, there will be starting a series of work group meetings on disinformation. It will all be streamed online, not streamlined, but streamed online. I'm happy to see that it also includes Ms. Urška Umek, that is head of media unit of the Council of Europe. And a week after, there will be a large conference together with Sweden, which is the sharing the OSCE, on the trust in media and the trust in public info. Finally, I'd like to, as an ending to this Friday, give you some tools and hopefully invite to cooperation on an issue that is a part of safety of journalists agenda, but is also a very important part of the disinformation agenda, and that is the safety of female journalists, online in particular. So there are specific targets to the online, which most of us are aware about now. And of course, I'd like to say also, no, not yet, please wait. And I also like to say that women journalists that are minorities in the country are extra challenged. But so one specific disinformation technique is to address women and to ruin their reputation, not only professionally, but also as human beings. And also to threaten them, to silence them. And I have to say, it works. And this is something that the office has been working on for several years, safety of female journalists. But quite a lot of things have happened the last 5 years since the office started, 6 years. Many commitments, international agreements and so forth, but still we see very limited change. So now I'd like to have the first screen, please. May I please ask for the first screen. So what we see here is some information from the UNESCO recent survey. Among the responding journalists, women journalists, 25% had received threats of physical violence, which is quite low, I would say. In some countries, it's much higher, and sexual violence against them. And also, interestingly, one out of 5 has reported that the online violence also manifested itself offline. So we have to stop talking about online threats as only words. It has a fundamental effect psychologically and financially for the media outlets, but also related to offline violence. So the attacks online on female journalists is part of the disinformation, and we can see that it actually does influence the democratic space and the democratic discussion. Women do not report on certain issues, and this influences of course, the narrative. And I mean, it's not only women who knows that there are certain topics in each country that if you report on that, it will be terrible. And that influences the conversation. So can I please ask for the second screen? It does not decrease. Despite all the work, we have the same situation. It's boring and it's frustrating and it's awful. And the kind of threats that I also would like to say that the kind of threats that women faces, and women faces much more threats than men, according to surveys. And the threats they face are so awful. It's actually difficult to talk about in public. And in situations like this, the brutality and the issues discussed and attacks are so awful. And one example that is not so explicit, but it's not just a rape threat against the women journalists, but actually against the women journalist baby girl, kill and rape this baby, things like that. And not some of the prominent journalists can get during period when there is something strong reporting upon, they can get 80, 100 threats per hour. It's massive. And who knows what's real and who knows what's just air. Okay? Next screen, please. So to address this, we have commissioned a resource guide which identifies different things that can be done, and it's based also what actually has been done in different countries. So there are examples in this book on what has been feasible in other contexts that can be done again. And it is available in 3 languages, Russian and Serbian and English so far. Next one. I hope to have some cooperation on this, and it addresses the 10 key actors in society that we have identified that influence the safety online, including most of the actors that have been talked about today. Internet intermediaries, police is addressed to the legislative branch of the government and the judiciary and the media outlets themselves. There are self-regulatory bodies, the media freedom institutions, the associations, the unions, and so on. So we have about between 2 and 4 recommendations or proposed actions per actor that can be performed in each country. And I would also like to invite cooperation on this, because of course we'd like to have these proposed actions tested and discussed and developed at national level. So everybody is listening, please call. Call or email. Next page, please. Next screen, yeah. So this is the table of content, and it does present some basic international framework and how to work with gender. And the key thing is to always include women whenever you want to. Addressing women journalists. Next slide, please. And the 10 chapters suggest different things for the 10 actors of media policy of society. So I hope next please, final screen, please. I'd like to invite to more work on this as a part of safety of human journalists, but also as a part of disinformation. And maybe I should say also that there are some basic things in there that we all can work for, and that is the data collection to make it at national level, make it in line with international standards you can compare, and also to have independent monitoring in all countries. And then that the police methods, with special methods to make women report, to make women heard and trust police, scaled up at all countries, and national action plans for safety when promoting this perspectives of this information targeting women, very sexualized matter, but also in different ways, campaigned, should be included. Thank you very much. And thanks again for a very nice day and nice, interesting presentations.
Thank you, Christine. As a female journalist, I'm very happy that you stressed the situation of women journalists that missed in our picture. Of course, that's very important to see this problem as well. We have a few more minutes to discuss, not many more minutes, but I would like to read two comments on our chat to you experts. Maybe you would like to, each one of you, say one final sentence when we think of what we've been doing all this afternoon. There's one comment asking, how can we put an end to hate speech online and harmful disinformation without seriously compromising the right to freedom of expression? Actually, I think that's the core of what we've been talking all the time, what we've been thinking about. And the second comment is a little bit similar. Many times developing countries, and not only, do use crises like earthquakes or pandemics as a justification not only to silence media, but also civil society organizations. And you see a lot of human rights abuse. What can the Council of Europe further to do to ensure these instances are confronted and removed? Our task this afternoon was to not only to see where the problems lie, but also to think about what has to be done. I got quite a few ideas from all of your speeches, what could be done. But maybe, like in your final words, the four of you could please, in 2 or 3 sentences, say what was, like, when you listen to the others, what was most important for you? Where should the Council of Europe, but also all of us, where should we stress? Where should we be active? What can we do against the endangerment of freedom of the press? And I would like to start with Scott.
Sure, of course. I mean, I would sort of end on the message that I mentioned at the end of my presentation, which is that, you know, I think we cannot say that we are exiting from the pandemic, because we are not yet. But the situation is changing. The dynamics are changing. And I think the Council of Europe, as an organization which is looking very closely at fundamental rights, we have the European Court of Human Rights, and different institutions of the Council of Europe which are monitoring states' compliance with fundamental freedoms. I think that it becomes very, very important to monitor that states really are exiting from these emergency states of emergency and emergency legislation when it becomes required. And I think that one of our big concerns at IPI is that the measures that have been introduced during the pandemic, some of which were justified, some of which weren't, that they become a permanent part of our either legal framework or also societal framework. If you look at things like surveillance, and I think that it becomes very important for the Council of Europe to take a leadership role to help, declare that many of these restrictions, many of these emergency functions need to be rolled back. We're really concerned that states may find ways to extend these states of emergency in a way that suits them, even when the immediate threat is gone or the most urgent threat is gone, that governments find ways to continue this type of development. And I think that should be a big concern for all of us. And I think the Council of Europe can play a leadership role here.
Thank you very much. Mira, what about people? What do they want? What do they need? What should the Council of Europe do?
I think a kind of open, clear affirmation to the values of a kind of free press and independent media, and ensuring that this is backed up with words, legislation, actions that support it. So be openly critical of countries that openly, restrict media freedom, and link it to other EU policies, to kind of structural funds, the way structural funds are distributed, to support in the Council of Europe. I think this is one thing. I think hate speech is interesting. I think there's a twofold approach. Firstly, the platforms where hate speech spread, those running the platform, should be asked to use existing legislation. There is existing legislation in most countries in Europe against hate speech, against inciting violence, and this needs to be implemented in the online sphere, and need some imagination but some action in figuring that out. And then the other thing is for newsrooms themselves, for editors to recognize that this is something that happens to their journalists, and to take it seriously, and to encourage them to report hate speech when they receive it, encourage them to go file police reports and take it seriously, and make it clear to their audiences that it's not acceptable. Thank you.
Patrick, what are your ideas about that? Just some short sentences, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. The legal framework, and be very vigilant where spaces are shrinking and laws and restriction are staying without really being justified by very severe threats by the pandemic, for instance. It's something we have to be very vigilant, because many laws maybe continue to live somehow, and also authorities like it because it is easy. So we have to be very vigilant on the legal side. Protecting whistleblowing is another thing. Countering hate speech, yes. Let me introduce one aspect that is missing a little bit so far. I followed the event, which is media information literacy. Council of Europe is doing also a lot in this regard. Don't look only at the side of journalists, but look at the side of how people are using media. And there's a great deal in teaching people how to consume media. It's a growing field. Deutsche Welle Academy is doing a lot in Eastern Europe, in Arabic countries. Media information literacy is very, very important to help people to distinguish this information, to see the effects of hate speech, etc. So don't underestimate the receiver aspect of the thing.
Thank you, Patrick. Christian, I imagine you agree. Media information literacy has to be removed. What are your last sentences?
Well, I'd like to say that I think the analysis has to become much more sophisticated on the problems, because now media and journalism is identified for some reason as the problem. Well, I think there are other actors that actually is the problem and should be addressed by different measures. And media outlets are not the main reason for spreading false information on COVID, for example. So a more sophisticated analysis of where the problem actually lies. And then as a consequence also, I think we need to join forces. We need to overcome the different member profiles, the different fundraising, competition, things like that, and to actually better identify where we are arguing for the same things. My office is doing that together with the Council of Europe, for example, around different issues, but also around other intergovernmental organizations and national organizations as soon as it can. But I think that work has to, by all media outlets, by NGOs, by international organizations, has to become stronger.
Thank you very much. We're at the end of the webinar, but not at the very end. We're having Henrik Daems speaking to us. He's president of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. Let's listen to his closing address, but please don't turn off directly after his speech, because I want to thank some people in the very end, and it would be nice if there was some audience for the thanking. Won't take long, but please let's watch the video, and then I'll have to say a few last words. Thank you for joining in. Thank you for speaking to us, to all four of you.
Good day.
Good day.
Let me start by thanking the organizers and Presidency of the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe for taking on board this very important subject and bringing together so many interesting speakers. Allow me to reflect on some of the issues that you have discussed. Starting with a general assessment, the COVID-19 health crisis and its serious negative impact on the various aspects of our life. The media freedom is one of them, but an extremely important one. During the COVID-19 pandemic in several of our member states, information has been essential and sometimes vital for the public to be aware of the dangers of the pandemic and safety measures in place. Now, paradoxically, as shown by the increased number of alerts signaled by the Council of Europe platform for the protection of journalism and the safety of journalists, threats to those at the forefront of making such information available and accessible to the public, journalists and media outlets, have intensified. Now, at the start of the crisis, governments in several countries declared state of emergency, a sovereign right in time of crisis, but one which, even in times of national emergency, should make sure that interventions on fundamental freedoms and special measures taken to combat the sanitary crisis must meet strict conditions. They should be temporary, necessary, appropriate, and proportionate. And it is precisely in times of crisis that the oversight performed by parliaments, by the justice system, and by the media are more important than ever for the safeguard of our democracies. Even under exceptional circumstances, no red lines should be crossed. Now, member states must fulfill their positive obligations to protect media freedom and the safety of journalists by using all necessary means to end physical and verbal attacks on media professionals. The reality tells a different story, one in which some governments have used the pandemic as a pretext for adopting emergency legislation restricting fundamental freedoms, including the freedom of information. Others have exploited the crisis to strengthen their hold over communication with the public. They have been trying to shape media coverage to avoid criticism of their actions on the ground that it undermines public order. Now, this is worrying, especially in view of the very important role of journalists to keep the public well informed on issues related to the pandemic. Now, the risk of disinformation has been cited as an excuse to silence media critical of governmental action. Now, of course, false information has the potential to do considerable harm, particularly in times of crisis like the current pandemic. Therefore, it must be fought as soon as it emerges, through fact-checking and media literacy, for example. However, the fight against false information must not be used as a pretext to curb or censor the freedom of media. One more important aspect. The COVID-19 crisis has seriously affected the economic sustainability of the present journalists. Even before the economic model of conventional media was already badly hit by the loss of most advertisers who had deserted print media and moved online. Advertising revenues are now dropping even more quickly during the public health crisis, newspaper sales have slumped, and companies are preparing for an economic downturn, leaving journalism endangered on a global scale. The media have been operating during the pandemic in difficult conditions that considerably impede access to reliable information and increase the risk of spreading information that has not been verified against established standards. So in conclusion, I would like to reiterate that the exceptional circumstances arising from the public health crisis must not be used as a pretext by member states to restrict freedom of expression and media freedom. It is vital to ensure freedom of expression in general and freedom of the media in particular. Let's not forget that quality information is of vital importance for democratic processes and for effectively fighting the virus and its consequences.
Thank you everybody for taking part in this webinar. I hope you took along at least some thoughts that you might meditate on the next weeks and months. How can we help journalism to function well, to bloom, to give its best? What can each and every one of us do to stabilize the trust good journalism needs? We've heard a lot of ideas. We described the problems. We have had a lot of ideas. What can be done? I think one of the most important functions of this seminar was to state the problem, to make it public, to focus our attention on this problem of this real vital problem for a democratic society. Some people have done a lot to enable this thing, to enable this exchange of thoughts. And I would like to name they've given their best to make this thing happen. I want to thank Somi Nicol, Oskar Umek, Mihaela Partig, Emma Gruden, and please forgive all mispronouncing. Maxime Miro made the whole thing possible as technician. And surely I forgot some other people who've been contributing for this project. Let me thank each and every one of you for making such a conference possible, because there's one good thing about COVID, I think, that we can get together in such a way that we can exchange thoughts, even though we're not allowed to get together. May we all contribute to the freedom of press in different ways, because as a journalist, I can really say democratic societies are much more livable and enjoyable if there's a free press. And thank you for your attention. Thank you for the heart you have for the freedom of press. And so I'm going to close this webinar. Thank you for having been with us.